Hey guys, thanks for clicking on this video. My name is Sho and welcome to my channel, or welcome back. I talk about books, their authors, their adaptations, and today's video is a doozy. So I'm just gonna dive straight into it, okay? Picture this. One man drowns in a canal. Another man disembowels himself in some government offices. These two men, they didn't really know each other in person, they weren't really friends, and they weren't rivals in the, traditional letter writing, passive aggressive way. But one of them had opinions, very strong opinions, and he expressed them to a devastatingly fatal effect. In this episode of Literary Beeves, we're going to explore the really strange relationship between two titans of Japanese literature. These guys were tortured souls who had very different outlooks, very different philosophies on how to live, how to write, what art is, how to die. And they're from different generations, and effectively, one is trying to expunge the memory of the other. Yukio Mishima and Osamu Dazai. And for all their differences that I just mentioned, these two actually have a few things in common. They wrote predominantly about the fractured self. They wrote in the I-novel format. One of them pretty much invented it. The other one took it to new heights. And as previously mentioned, they both died by their own hand. And it was in that darkness, these two authors really showed their colors. Dazai, the messy, fragile, alcoholic sad boy that he was, just wanted to disappear into it and wallow in it. Whereas Mishima, Yukio Mishima, he was cosplay samurai with a gym membership. He wanted to fucking dominate the darkness. He wanted to sculpt it and he wanted to make it beautiful. This story takes place in post-war Japan, a Japan that was utterly humiliated in their defeat in World War II. Japan that was wallowing in its shame, not least because of, Japanese pride, but also because of the atrocities they committed during World War II. And this story is about depression versus discipline. And it's about disintegration versus design. And it is the story of two artists trying to figure out what the hell to do with themselves as a symbol of Japan in a world that is utterly meaningless to them. That is why I'm calling this video The Battle for Japan's Soul. Like this. Osamu Dazai was born Tsushima Shuji in 1909, and he came from money. His parents had servants, kind of money, but Osamu Dazai never really felt at home in himself. And as a teenager, late teenager, he discovered two things that would define him for the rest of his life. And those two things were Marxism and suicidal ideation. He flunked unceremoniously out of university, and this kind of began in university and it kind of trickled on afterwards as well. He flirted heavily with communism, okay? But he seemingly did it unwittingly because he didn't seem to be aware of the consequences of what he was doing, like the statement he was making by helping out the Student Communist Party. He spent most of his adult life in a dazed haze of women, both married and unmarried, alcohol and morphine. And as you can imagine, his relationships were messy and his writing even messier. But boy, oh boy, could Osamu Dazai write. He specialized in the I-novel, the Shishosetsu, which is basically autobiographical fiction, but at the very least in his case and Mishima's case, so thinly veiled that you can practically see their dental records in their prose. And his books aren't so much about characters per se, they're really more about himself just kind of disassembled and scattered across all of the pages. For example, his most famous work, No Longer Human, which is incidentally Reddit's most favorite book, that is just a first-person point of view downward spiral into shame and alienation and spiritual, emotional exhaustion. There really isn't a plot per se. It is just a slow motion, drawn out portrait of a collapse. And if that sounds like a downer, yes, 100% it is, but boy, is it brilliant. Dazai is the master of turning his pain into prose so compellingly that we, the reader, we just eat it up. He died in 1948 by double suicide with his mistress. Yukio Mishima was born in 1925 as Hiraoka Kimitake, and he came from a similarly elite, well-off, privileged background. However, Mishima had a very different coping mechanism: perfection. He was quite a sickly kid, so it's really quite understandable why he was obsessed with death. And as he grew older, he became obsessed with beauty and physical strength. And as it turned out, nearing more towards adulthood, nationalism too. And now, as an adult, he actively cultivated this public persona that was equal parts literary genius and equal parts political performance. This guy wrote, acted, made music, he loved martial arts, he was a keen bodybuilder, and he founded a private militia. I'll link that video down below, as well as my no spoiler review of Osamu Dazai's No Longer Human. Yeah, so as you can probably see, unlike Dazai, Mishima was pure control. This man built himself up like a Renaissance statue. Mind, body, spirit, beauty, death, strength, the glory days of the Japanese samurai era. From the outside looking in, this psychological pathology of infirmed Weasley kid becoming nationalist beefcake, it seems pretty obvious, right? But one thing Yukio Mishima had in buckets was self-awareness. And this is what made his work so well observed and so revelatory. Mishima's early novels, like Confessions of a Mask, yeah, they were confessional, like, duh, it's in the name. It didn't feel like Dazai's work, where it was just like, bleh, just letting it spill everywhere. Mishima was more like angles and reflection, you know, techno song. It didn't feel like he was intimating something to you. It feels more like Mishima is making you watch. I heard this quote on an episode of Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, and I think it's so fucking true. It's by David Reisman. It goes like this: "The Japanese are like everybody else, only more so." And I mention it because the Shishosetsu, the I novel, is basically just autofiction, right? Autobiographical fiction, except only more so. It just has less chill. The form deliberately blurs the distinction between narrator and author, and it presents quite often like real life experiences with very minimal fictional disguise. So the emphasis really isn't so much on character development, character interactions, or plot even. It's more on It's more on moral ambiguity and internal psychology. Both Mishima and Dazai used the I novel to examine the self, well, themselves, really, as a kinda fractured and conflicted entity. And Dazai thrived in it. Man, No Longer Human reads like his intimate diary. It has this raw, cracked open vulnerability, and it is simply the portrait of a man's life, Osamu Dazai's life, breaking down because this guy just does not know how to cope with the shame and despair and loneliness of not knowing how to function like a normal human in a society. No wonder it's Reddit's most favorite book. Mishima, on the other hand, initially though he was influenced by this form, as he grew, he started to distance himself from it calling the I novel, criticizing the I novel as ill-disciplined and self-indulgent. Mishima believed that literature, art, should not just expose emotions, but that they should shape them and elevate them. He considered the I novel like a literary cul-de-sac, and as he went on writing, he turned more towards mythic and stylized registers. His prose sharpened, the themes, the content of his themes also grew, and he went from introspection to architecture, like the architecture of novels, designing novels that had echoes of the great Greek tragedies. He didn't want just a muddy puddle of existential dread. Mishima was building cathedrals of existential dread. The bottom line is this: Dazai used the I novel to implode, whereas Mishima used it as a launch pad that he then torched on his way out. This is the beef. In 1947, a 22-year-old Yukio Mishima reviewed Dazai's The Setting Sun. It was a big deal at the time, both the novel and the review. Yukio Mishima didn't hold back. He accused it of moral weakness, sloppy thinking, self-indulgence. There's that word again. He said that it lacked artistic discipline, that it was lacking in form and craft and restraint. 22-year-old Mishima didn't just dislike the book. He saw the book as a symbol of everything that was wrong with post-war Japan. And as such, his criticism took on this flavor of a direct criticism of Dazai, of whole generations' approach to culture and art and life. In Mishima's eyes, Dazai was a cautionary tale. Here was a really talented man who threw it all away in the name of authenticity, in the name of just opening yourself up. Because Mishima thought that art should impose order on the chaos and not just wallow in it like some pig in the mud. And Mishima being Mishima, this review wasn't just a review. This review wasn't just the younger author, the author from a younger generation taking a pop at the older one, right? This was his fucking manifesto. This was Mishima staking out his territory. He was standing for literature with discipline, intention, and beauty, even if it caused pain. Dazai read the review, and true to form, he didn't offer a public response, but biographers have said that he was quietly devastated. Who wouldn't be when some young upstart calls you the final indulgence of a sick era? Around a year after the review was published, Dazai was dead. Years later, Mishima would still describe Dazai's work as symptomatic of a broken culture. This attack, he didn't really call it an attack, but he would always maintain that it was not personal. It was surgical. He saw Dazai as a wound that had to be cauterized. This was generational. This was a necessary apotheosis. Mishima saw himself as transformative, ushering in a new era of art and literature, one that was more classical, one of form and beauty and strength and intention and greatness, rising from the ashes of Dazai's prostrate and defeated generation. Both Mishima and Dazai died by suicide, and the differences are worth exploring. Dazai, in keeping with his whole vibe, died in a low-key tragic, in a quietly romantic, and not at all spectacular way. He drowned in a small canal with his mistress. And yeah, the timing was eerie. It was around 1 year after Mishima's review, and he was found on his birthday. The death was intimate and personal, like the ending to one of his books, and it wasn't in any way performative. It was just the simple culmination of a long, drawn-out psychological decline. Mishima's, on the other hand, is a full-blown Wagnerian opera. More details in my other video, but quickly. It's 1970. Yukio Mishima and 4 members of his private militia storm government offices in Tokyo. They take a general hostage. They try to overthrow the government, tear up the Japanese democratic constitution, and elevate the emperor to god status. He wasn't taken seriously, of course. He even tried to give a speech from the balcony to the military garrison station down below, but he was just heckled, so he committed seppuku, and one of his militia had to behead him. It was messy, and it was bloody, to say the least. It was bold, but it was also all 100% intentional. Same result, same outcome, very different production value. Both men died in a way that corresponded precisely with their aesthetics and the values that they lived by. Naturally, their deaths took on a greater symbolic meaning. These weren't just personal deaths. They weren't just deaths that were extensions of each respective writer's literary projects either. These deaths came to be the story of post-war Japan. Dazai is still a cult hero, especially amongst you angsty students and you self-identifying introverts who've read your highlighted copies of No Longer Human and Camus' L'Étranger like 4 times. And man, I am with you. Osamu Dazai's writing endures because it is brutally honest. Even if you don't agree with it, you still believe it. You still believe in the reality of it because it is captivating. It is utterly immersive. And his legacy still thrives today. In fact, it's gone all TikTok, Tumblr core with adaptations and merch. And Mishima, obviously, is a lot harder to digest. His talent, his genius is undeniable. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize, and many say he would have won, if he hadn't tried to overthrow the Japanese government. But his far-right politics, his pageantry, and his obsession, fixation with a death with meaning kind of put him somewhere between literary genius and fascist performance artist. If Mishima were high art, Dazai is cult hero. They are both essential to understanding not only Japanese literature, but understanding Japan, the soul of Japan. Dazai gave voice to post-war collapse and capitulation. Mishima tried to resurrect the fantasy, the spirit of pre-war strength. And actually, these two never met, but they spoke across a chasm, like 2 sides of a cracked mirror. And, they say history rhymes, right? This wasn't so much a literary beef as it was a literary duet, an aria, quite possibly a requiem.